Now more than ever, the Constitution is at the very heart of the political debate these days, and Congress is now requiring that every piece of legislation come accompanied by its constitutional justification. And the Tea Party is demanding a return to the kind of government that the framers envisioned. But just what did those men who lived 200 years ago really want? Joining me now for a discussion of truth and myth, George Will, Michael Eric Dyson of Georgetown University, Harvard University history professor Jill Lepore, who's also the author of The Whites of Their Eyes and the Tea Party's Revolution and the Battle Over American History, and Richard Stengel, editor-in-chief of Time magazine and writer of the cover story on the Constitution, Does It Still Matter? Thank you all for being here. Let me start with you, George. How do you explain the ubiquity of the Constitution today as a real living piece of political debate?
Well, first of all, American politics always has a retrospective cast, always looking back to the Declaration and the Constitution. All of our arguments get litigated through these documents, from did Jefferson have the power to make the Louisiana Purchase? James Madison, his successor, the architect of the Constitution, vetoed an internal improvements bill because he thought that went beyond the powers of the federal government, right down to today, when the most novel new development in our politics, the Tea Party movement, is named after something that happened in 1773. So there's a retrospective cast naturally built into our politics. But what has happened today is a large number of Americans, this one included, believe that the somewhat promiscuous expansion of government power in recent years raises questions about whether we still have a government of limited, delegated, and enumerated powers. That is the Madison Project still viable?
So you say over the last few years, do you mean particularly now in the Obama administration?
Yes.
What do you say to that, to that very categoric?
Wow. Well, I think that this retrospective cast that George Will refers to is absolutely right, but there's some gaps, some holes, lacuna, gulfs, abysses. You know, you read the Constitution in the Congress, but oops, I forgot the part about slavery. You talk about women and people of color who have been elided, distorted, relegated to the margins, and altogether seen as marginalia. I think that the Constitution is a powerful, living, vibrant document. I think it's been hijacked by people with narrow, vicious, and parochial visions. And I think the assertion that now we of all people, this generation, is somehow vulnerable to rebuff of the Constitution is like a Hegelian problem. You think your generation is the greatest generation and the apotheosis of history finds its resting point in you. Slow down. The point is that the Constitution is durable, it's powerful. Because of its flexibility, Black people and others are able to argue their way into an American identity and a vision for democracy that initially they were barred from. So I think that it's powerful.
But you do say hijacked by a vicious band of people. Do you think that's fair? I mean, is what's going on right now?
Well, I think it's the case that the Constitution has always been a subject of contest. I mean, each generation of Americans struggles to inherit the mantle and claim the mantle of both the Revolution or of the Constitution. And what's actually, to me, a bit unusual about this political moment is that a lot of people are trying to claim both the Revolution and the Constitution. There's usually been more of a kind of oscillation. The Revolution is more often claimed by the left. The Constitution is more often, celebrated by the right. The Tea Party movement has really embraced both, and in a certain kind of way collapsed the two, which is interesting as a historical phenomenon. But it's not. It's neither novel nor sinister.
Let me just go back to George then. You say that it's become so important right now because of what you think is the excesses of the Obama administration. So you both are saying that it's because of Barack Obama, but from different positions.
Yes, that indeed Mr. Obama has claimed for the federal government the power to do things that are simply unprecedented. I mean, even the people who say that the mandates require American citizens as a condition of living in America to buy health care, no one denies that that's an unprecedented expansion of federal power.
But George, if you look at, every president expands federal power. Their view is from where they sit, and the Oval Office looks pretty great. I mean, George Bush was the greatest exponent of the expansion of executive power probably in American history, with the exception, of course, of FDR and Abraham Lincoln. So I think that the idea that Obama is somehow exceptional in this regard, rather than just a continuation of what the tradition has been, is kind of crazy to me. I mean, one of the things that the founders did, which I think we sometimes forget about in this discussion, that the founders, didn't actually create a large federal government. They didn't. What they created was a very weak executive. I mean, Article 2 about what the president does is about half the size of Article 1. I mean, they didn't want a very strong executive because they feared kings. But pretty much every president since then has been expanding executive power, and there are all kinds of reasons, both good and bad, for it, which we could discuss.
Right.
Jill, as a historian, Rick Stengel has brought up the idea of big government or small government. Didn't the Constitution actually give more power to a federal government, to a centralized government after the Articles of Confederation?
It suggested it centralized and strengthened the power of the federal government, especially in reference to the Articles of Confederation, which framed a very loose confederation of states. There were 13 separate currencies, and each state could have its own navy. And when we talk about big government and small government, it's a little bit hard to do that in the abstract. I mean, the Postal Service in 1790 was 6 people. I mean, I think it's really easy to get kind of tangled up in the intensity of our own modern political rhetoric.
Yes, the framers of the Constitution wanted to strengthen the federal government, but they knew that a government is A, necessary, but B, inherently dangerous. And therefore, in the act of creating a more competent federal government, they sought to limit it. James Madison, the architect, in the definitive commentary on the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, specifically in Federalist 45, said, the powers delegated to the federal government by the proposed Constitution are few and defined. That's either true or it's not.
That is the continuing shift in balance that's been going on throughout our history.
Well, you just raised this. I mean, obviously, two different held views on the size of government and the strengths of the central versus the states. So the question then is it an absolutist document? Is it open to interpretation? Is it something that the letter of the law and the actual words have to be followed today, 200 years later?
It's one thing to say it's open to interpretation, which it obviously is. It's very open textured language. On the other hand, I mean, when you say unreasonable searches and seizures, what's reasonable? We argue about that. But to say that the Constitution is a living, evolving document, as you did, is almost oxymoronic. A Constitution is supposed to freeze things. It is an anti-evolutionary device, as Justice Scalia has said. It is intended to put certain things beyond the reach of transient majorities. That's the language of Justice Jackson in a famous case. The point of the Constitution is that majorities are dangerous, and we have to protect against them. Hence what Oliver Wendell Holmes said, if my fellow citizens want to go to hell, I'll help them because that's my job. He was saying the Constitution exists to enable majorities. That's exactly wrong.
That's all great on paper, I mean, which is where it's written. But when it makes the transition from parchment to pavement, there again is the rub. The reality is that document, when I talked about being living and vital, I'm talking about the interpretation of it. I'm talking about the meaning of it. I'm talking about the symbolic power and the cachet, the purchase of notions of freedom, justice, equality, and democracy. They mean nothing if they are simply interred in ink. They must travel into our common humanity. And I'm suggesting that that document is critical to the reinterpretation of people of color and women. We were rejected into the mainstream of America. Were it not for some vibrant reinterpretation of that document and appealing to its living legacy, none of us could be here. I wouldn't be here talking to you, not as an equal, at least.
One of the misnomers in our society is that a lot of people confuse the Declaration with the Constitution. Right. The Declaration is the music. The Constitution is the libretto. Right. And those values that we cherish are really in the Declaration, and they're also, by the way, in the amendments, I mean, which and the Bill of Rights, which people forget was not part of the original Constitution.
But what we hear today, and I want to know what you think about this, George, and actually Jill as well, we do get a sense, certainly from the Tea Partiers, certainly from the big political leaders now, Michelle Bachmann, Sarah Palin, she hasn't jumped in, but nonetheless, they are framing this debate around the Constitution, that this is a document that's under siege. Do you think it's under siege?
Has been for a century. Woodrow Wilson, Crowley, the rest of the progressive movement set out to say the Constitution was all very well once, but now we're a more complicated society with more grand ambitions for the government, and therefore what the founders did, which was to put the government on a short leash, has to be undone. We have to cut the leash on government, and that's what the progressive project has been for a century.
Well, so that has been, in fact, I think that therein lies the origins of this particular impasse that we are in now. I mean, it's a very old impasse. It's nothing. I mean, I think the sense of crisis is grossly exaggerated, and we have a very adversarial journalistic world in which we're going to hear more about crisis than not. But the framing of that debate does indeed date to the progressive era, when You know, there's a set of arguments made that the document is a document, a piece of parchment, and it needs to be worshipped as such in the way that we might worship other documents that have different kinds of meaning to us in a more kind of epistemological way. That idea goes much farther back, and I think indeed it can in many ways be traced to the founders themselves. You know, when Jefferson says the Constitution should never be, you know, looked at as the Ark of the Covenant, too sacred to be touched. You can find other kinds of longer narratives.
You bring in the sort of religious aspect of it, and today, again, it is something that so many people talk about it as if it was a religious document. There is no word God in the more than 4,000 words of the Constitution. Was it divine? Is it possible to say that it was divinely inspired, even though it doesn't say?
But the Constitution, again, I go back to the comparison between the Declaration and the Constitution. The Constitution is a blueprint for the House. It doesn't tell you what color curtains to have or whether to have it 2 stories or 3 stories. It's a guideline. It's a roadmap. It's a kind of guardrail. It doesn't tell you where to be in the road, but to prevent you from straying off. I mean, I would say that the Constitution is resolutely a-religious or outside of the Christian framework that the founders were working in with the Declaration and other things. I mean, it really is, it's if people read it, it doesn't have any poetry in it, right? It's just a guideline.
Well, but see, the amendments, this is why I get the point about the difference between the Declaration of Independence with the Constitution, but I would still argue that the amendments to the Constitution suggest that we are having doubts, skepticism, we are rethinking, we're trying to include a broader circle of privilege for those who have been historically locked out, which means then that the exclusion of some people and the inclusion of others suggests politics, negotiation. The document itself, if Rick is right, about being a blueprint for, and not telling us what color the curtains are, but it does suggest that that fundamental document has to be opened up.
The framers were not narrowed and blinkered men. They were men of the Enlightenment. They believed in progress, to which end they included in this document an amendment provision. They said there will be changes made.
Right.
The difference is, do you amend the Constitution by the casual reinterpretation of it, or do you candidly, when you want to change the structure of the government, change it by the amendment process they provide?